This morning, we are getting a masterclass in empathy, more specifically, practical ways to turn empathy into action. And it's coming to us from Canada's 28th Governor General, the Right Honourable David Johnston, who is leading readers through what he sees as the inherent goodness of people in a new book that's part how-to, part memoir, with some personal stories sprinkled in along the way. The Right Honourable David Johnston is with us again in studio. Great to have you back here.
Oh, it's wonderful to be with you, Anne-Marie. Thank you.
So here's the new book. It is called Empathy. What does that word mean to you?
Well, it's not sympathy. Sympathy is I feel sorry for your plight. Empathy is I see your situation, I understand it, and we're going to walk together to make it better.
You write in here about COVID and the lessons learned from the pandemics, some of the shortcomings that it exposed, and what Canada can do to improve. So how does empathy play into this? Where were examples of empathy in the pandemic?
I think the first thing it showed us, Anne-Marie, is our mutual vulnerability, that we are part of a global family, and what happens in one part of that family affects another part of the family. And that's both a mutual vulnerability and a mutual responsibility, so that if we're going to deal with something like COVID, we can't sort of batten our own hatches and forget the rest of the world. And therefore, we require empathetic understanding of the plight of other peoples and to work with them to improve their situation, and so doing improve ours.
It's an important lesson right now because cost of living has gone up.
Huge.
People are stretched, they are pressured. And when that happens, our dominant default can be to go in and think only about ourselves.
That's a very good understanding or interpretation. I believe that we're actually born with empathetic relationships in our very gene, that it's not the natural reaction to difficulty is not to flight or to raise arms or to batten down the hatches. I think the more natural one is to say, well, I have to look after myself and my family, and how do I look after others, etc. So we're in this together, and we'll deal with it together. The trust book, which we wrote before empathy is a part of a book, two bookends, trust and empathy, was dedicated to children who offer their trust implicitly in the full expectation of fairness. And that's, I think, an empathetic relationship developing. And in the case of the empathy book, the dedication is to my family, my wife and my children, from whom I learned empathy. I kind of grew up as a kind of hard-scrabble kid from a relatively very modest family in Sault Ste. Marie, and started work at age 8 because I knew that in my family, if I wanted a new bike or a pair of jeans, go and earn the money for it.
Right.
And self-reliance and that sense of independence was very important to me as a young person.
Yeah.
And it was only gradually through my interaction with wonderful coaches, mentors, and so on, and then my wife and my family, that I think empathy became a more prominent feature and one that I admire very much.
You share in this book about becoming Governor General. It had never been on your radar, and when you got the call asking, would you consider it, you said, well, maybe. But somehow, despite that, your name ends up on the short list. And what ultimately decided to make you say yes?
Well, ultimately, it was my wife. You were quite right about that call. Mr. Harper, as Prime Minister, set up a selection committee, independent selection committee for the post of Governor General and the Lieutenant Governors of the 10 provinces and the 3 commissioners, which I think is a very appropriate approach to this, that you want an independent expert committee to look at various candidates, folks don't apply, and make a recommendation to the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, which he in turn makes the recommendation to the Queen, or then was. So I got the call and I said, would you be interested? And I said, well, you know, I've been a general manager of universities for 27 years. I really enjoy the job, but I guess I can't do it forever. But, you know, I know how these things go. You know, if by some, this is a long list, if by some fluke of imagination, I happen to get on a short list, give me a call, I'd give it some thought. 5 minutes later, I get the call back, sir, it's a short list. And then I said, oh my, well, I'll have to, give me 4 or 5 days. I usually consult with 2 or 3 good friends on these kinds of things. And my wife, oh, sir, he said, you can't speak to anyone.
Oh.
I said, I can't speak to anyone? Not my wife, even? No, sir. I said, well, I think the answer must be no, because if I said yes and by some fluke I was appointed, my wife would say, here are the bags on the doorstep, dear, you're on your own. So it was Sharon, my wife, who was not thrilled about jumping into the public arena that way, but we went and had dinner with Mr. and Mrs. Harper on a Saturday evening, and they they focused on her, and God bless her, she's a good soldier. She says, let's do it. And we were enormously privileged, Anne-Marie, to be 7 years in that position.
Well, we watched you in that position, I mean, longer than what is typical. And, you know, we watched you when the royal tours would come. We'd watch you in events like that. Speaking of teamwork, I want to talk about Sharon, because I love her. She is independent and of her own mind. And you were right to say, I can't take a job without considering her. You guys have been married for nearly 60 years.
For this poor woman, it's worse than that. I was her first date in high school when she was 13.
Oh, so wow.
Imagine living with a guy like me for all that period of time.
Well, you must be doing something right. You are the proud parents of 5 daughters, grandparents to 14 grandchildren.
Right.
What has helped you both weather these hard times together? 60 years is quite a feat.
Well, my family's my rock. I've experienced so much joy from just having children when our first daughter was born, and then the grandchildren. And for me, you know, with difficult decisions as you from time to time, and there are any ethical dilemmas, how would I explain that to my children and now my grandchildren? It's a wonderful test. But they have been so important in my life, and my religious faith is important to me as well, from which values spring in my case.
You must have learned a lot about empathy from her.
Yes, I did. Very early on, just the consideration for others and the natural thoughtfulness that other people. But I tell the young people that, you know, especially teenagers as they're finding their way in life, if you can find a way that the universe doesn't center on you and your achievements and so on and how you look and how you compete, but reach out to someone who isn't quite as fortunate as you, all of a sudden, a great weight comes off your shoulder when you move from the first person singular I to the first person plural we, and work together. And whatever happiness or satisfaction you got in your own achievements of being admired by your peers turns into the joy of seeing other people succeed. It's a wonderful, wonderful consequence of human activity, of that joy of helping others. And on a broader scale, it's really so important in the world today. Why do we have this situation where Russia is invading Ukraine and people killing one another in a battlefield because one particular country by one particular leader says, I think I want that territory back and this is what I'm going to do? There's a total lack of empathy there, of total disrespect and abandonment of a feeling of sense of responsibility for other people. And you know, our world, which is somewhat chaotic today, empathy is a very important quality. Respect for one another, kindness, and working together to make other people's situation better.
I want to end our interview with something that you talk about, having to unlearn things in the book. You say one of the biggest wake-up calls for you has been how our country deals with Indigenous people.
Sure.
And this is a saying, and I've heard this with other marginalized groups, but do nothing about us without us.
It's a very important statement. And in doing nothing about us without us, if you want to do something with us, then you have to come to understand who that other is and what their particular values and aspirations are. And if you establish that understanding, then I think you can walk together. But if it's, I see your situation and I think I've got the answer and just do this as I'm telling you to do this, and it'll be well. So at the Rita Hall Foundation, Anne-Marie, which we set up in 2012 to amplify the reach of the Office of the Governor General, the foundation, which is now 10 years old, one of our most recent programs in partnership with MasterCard Foundation is to educate 10,000 young Indigenous people as teachers.
Great.
Education in New Buffalo. And it's not just enough to identify a young Indigenous person in high school with scholarship help, but it's the mentoring, counseling, et cetera, that comes from that. And to develop a whole new professional group of teachers who come from the Indigenous cultures and are responsible for the education of their own people going forward. And it will work if it is regionally developed by Indigenous people working with faculties of education. It won't work if it's a kind of a great plan drawn up in Ottawa and say, go and do this.
Well, we've seen the damage that was done by that original plan.
Yes.
Great to have you back with us again. A reminder to everybody, the book is called Empathy.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this, be sure to subscribe here, or you can check out more Your Morning videos right here.